We are going to go ahead and get started. This is the San Luis Obispo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District Water Resources Advisory Committee, WRAC, for today, Wednesday, March 4th, 2020. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here at the City Hall for this month. So first, I'd just like to start with establishing a quorum. So if you are a voting member here today, could you please raise your hand? $16?
It's 17 with you.
17? Okay. 17. Thanks so much. And we'll go ahead and do introductions. I'm Andy P., San Luis Obispo City Council.
I'm Jim Gehring, District 4 Rep.
Ron Riley, Visitor.
Christine Mulholland, Environmental at Large.
Courtney Howard, County Public Works.
Tom Mora, RCD.
Mark Termine, County Public Works.
Katie Don, County Public Works. Taylor Milton, County Public Works. Leslie Lance, Riverview City Council.
Steve Simpson, Shannon, San Juan Water District. Nesbitt, EPC.
Marcia Godfrey, Crystal Beach City Council. Shirley Gibson, Oceano CSD.
Will Clemens, Oceano CSD, General Manager.
Linda Finke, County Department. Angelina, City of San Francisco.
Brian Chen, City of San Luis Obispo Utilities Department.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Edwards, private sector, Los Osos.
Ron Nuns, Los Osos CSC.
Glenn Bando, County Public Works.
Greg Graywall, District 5 Representative.
Dennis Louts, District 1 Representative.
Steve Carter, Slow County Farm Bureau.
Craig Armstrong, Oklahoma CSD.
Ed Eby, Oklahoma CSD.
Tim Walters, Development at Large.
Marlis McPherson, Morro Bay City Council member. Cynthia Ruffogel, Ocala resident. Linda Chipping, Coastal San Luis RCD.
David Chipping, Environmental at Large.
Steph Wald, Quick Lands Conservation, Environmental Alternate.
I'm Brendan Clark. I'm with County Public Works. I'm RAC Secretary now. And yes, go ahead.
Tom Gray, District 2 Representative.
All right, thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for being here. All right. Next item on the agenda is review and approval of the December 4th meeting minutes. That was our last RAC meeting. Any comments or changes? All right. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
Craig and
Christine.
who's second?
Christine Mulholland.
Okay. All right.
And Eric Greening is here. All right, thank you. Let's see. So
We
we
have to take a vote.
Yeah. This is a roll call vote.
All right. District 1.
Abstain.
District 2, Tom Gray. District 3, Natalie. No. Jim Gehring. District 4.
I'm going to abstain. I wasn't here for that one.
Greg Graywall.
Yes.
Kirk Bollinger. All right. George Kendall. Tim Walters.
Yes.
Okay. Christine Mulholland.
Yes.
Eric Greening.
Yes.
David Chipping.
Yes.
Okay. Linda Chipping.
Yes.
All right. Tom Mora.
Abstain.
Okay. John Neal or Jamie Hendrickson. Scott Buffalo, Mike Schwartz, CMC. John Reed. No. Steve Carter.
Abstain.
Anthony Lindstrom. Matthew Hubbard. No. Steve Sinton.
Abstain.
Lee Nesbitt. Lan George. Kristen Barnich? Nope. Charles Bourbeau, Nick DeBar, Desi Lance,
Yes.
Marlies McPherson,
Yes.
thank you. Christopher Alekiel, Kirk Gonzalez, Marcia Guthrie, Andy Pease,
Yes.
Brad Hageman, no. Melissa Bland, John Alshin, Scott Duffield, no. Ron Munns,
Yes.
okay. Craig Armstrong,
Yes.
Shirley Gibson,
Trustee.
Anthony Calvins, Charles Grace, Tina Meyer, Jeff English. No. Okay. All right.
All right. Motion carries. Thank you. And next item is elections for chairperson and vice chairperson. As an update, Linda Seifert has resigned as the District 3 representative due to personal health and things going on. So that spot is currently wide open. All right. So do we have any nominations? Christine.
Yes, I nominate Andy Pease to continue for another year on the WRAC chair
Great.
position.
I'll second.
Thank you. All right. I will accept that. Any other nominations for a chair? And then we'll go on to vice chair. All in favor of me serving another year as chair, please say aye.
Aye.
Awesome. Thank you for that vote of confidence. All right.
Relief.
Harder to get out once you get
I believe in this group, so I'm happy to continue in this role. Okay, so vice chair. Is anyone interested in stepping up to serve as vice chair? I'm just going to sit here until
No one
somebody's...
will admit to any vices.
I nominate Eric.
Did I just admit to a vice?
Do you have interest in that, Eric?
I could. It has been in the hands of environmental people the chair and vice chair have been in the hands of environmental reps quite a bit in recent cycles. But if no one considers that an imbalance, I'd be willing personally. Yeah.
Okay. That's all right. That was pretty lukewarm, but it's a body to fill that role. So we'll. Okay. All in favor of Eric Greening for vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? Sorry, I didn't even ask that for mine. All right. Thank you, Eric. Okay. We have ongoing updates. I'm just going to read each item and holler if you have some question or comment. All right. Rain and reservoir update.
Please.
Rain.
Yeah.
Yeah, same item, California Drought Monitor Summary.
Just an interesting observation. It seems like there's an increasing tendency for the so-called Mediterranean winter-centric rainfall season not to happen. I don't know if it's the direction we're moving in climate change, but we seem to sometimes get the ends of the rainy season with a big hollow in the middle. And it makes me wonder if we're migrating back toward the climate of the Miocene when there was much more seasonal distribution, or whether we're migrating toward the climate of the Mojave Desert when there's just less.
Let's at least hope the former. Yeah.
I had a comment, a follow-up to Eric's comment, and that is, if you haven't read The West Without Water, you should. We could be returning to a dry period, and it would mean a 30 to 40% loss in what had used to be the average rate. The other thing I'd mention is that we've done a groundwater model for the Santa Maria River Valley groundwater basin, and part of that study was looking at what climate change would do to rainfall, and what climate change, when applied to that study, what it showed is it's going to be warmer, but it's not going to necessarily be drier. So we've got two conflicting viewpoints. But the West without water, very interesting book.
And even with warmer, we have higher evaporation.
Yeah, thank you. And keep that in mind for item 5 when we talk about water conservation. Greg?
Yes. To continue with that and a couple of the other items that are in the ongoing updates. All right, the state just increased the state water allocation from 10% to 15% in the last month, which is ridiculous when you pay for 100%. And obviously Trump has come to Bakersfield and signed some legislation because the federal government has charged a certain amount of water, so it's going to make a difference in some of that. And we're letting too much water go out of the ocean, and this is part of the whole deal. This is why the system was set up originally in the California aqueduct system, and it was paid for by the agriculturalists. It wasn't paid for by the environmentalists of the cities. So we need to be looking at this in ongoing things, and it's really indicative to understand that our state water that comes to our county, if you get 15% of the 25,000 acre feet, that doesn't come close to what the contracts are supposed to get. So we have 4,830 acre feet that we have to provide. They pay for a thing called a buffer. So they're paying for 10,000 acre feet of water that the county has to supply because they're the contractor and the other people are the subcontractors. And the rest of the taxpayers are paying the tax on the rest of that water that's not being used, and they get no benefit. And I know we're going to have a discussion later on this, and
right.
it really is going to come to this point is, why are people paying for a benefit they don't get? Why are we paying for something we never received anything for? We need 40% just to break even. So what I want to know is, when we get a certain percentage of that water, and let's just say it's 40%, 40% of 25,000 acre feet, that brings us to a good balance. We're going to get 15. Who's making up the rest of the water? Is it coming from Lopez? Is it coming from WRAC? Is it coming from, where is that makeup water that we owe the subcontractors? Where's it coming from? And so we need to look hard at investing more money into something that shows no benefit. And the other thing I'd like to note, and we're going to move further down your letters, is in the Stormwater Resources Plan, there is money out there for the Sigma projects for stormwater capture. I want to know what's being done in staff, looking for grants for stormwater capture, for well monitoring, for land subsidence, because the state is giving money for those things. And I want to know who's involved on looking at those programs and getting that money for our county. Because we have 5 basins that received almost $6 million to do their GSP plans. We've turned these plans in, and we have an opportunity to get more money to do what we do without charging the taxpayers. So I want to know what's going on. Thank you.
Noted. Yeah.
Andrea, I was just looking at page 17, and I see some figures which haven't been in our agenda before. I think it's like a map of California, indication of what areas are in drought.
Mm-hmm.
When did it decide that you're going to add that?
I was admiring those earlier. These are certainly public graphs that
I thought it might be good to add as part of our ongoing reporting of the rainfall and the status in the county. And it's something that's published every Thursday nationwide, but I personally felt it would be good information to pass on to the group, and so I went ahead and did that.
I'd say it's appreciated.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and clearly, as when there's a lot of rain, the energy and concern about water supply and the purview of this committee, it starts to fall off a little, and then as it's drier, it kind of ramps up again. So I think it's great to keep track of that. Thank you.
And on the Paso Basin, I just will note that the GSP as submitted to the state is open for public comment until April 15th, about another 6 weeks to get comments in. And then I presume we will hear back either that it's accepted or rejected or whatever.
Right, so comment period open on the Paso Basin until the GSP until April. Would you say April 15th?
April 15th.
April 15th.
I'm just noting what's in our
Yeah,
report, and I
and
presume then it would get back to us. The other thing I would note relative to the earworm, which, of course, usually it's statewide ballot measures that are the primary source of funding for the earworm program, and sometimes, we gradually transition from one to another. But I would note that the bond measure for school construction failed handily statewide, which may put a contrary wind in the sails of the people who are planning to put a big water bond on in November.
Also noted. And hopefully we can call that IRWM, because earworm just makes me uncomfortable.
It actually means just that in German. Ein earworm. It's a tune you can't get out of your head.
Better than the physical kind. All right, thank you. All right, let's see. So we're on C. Any other comments on the basin management and or IRWM?
Yeah, I just want to highlight for IRWM, the draft 2019 plan is out for public comment, and so that's open for another 2.5 weeks, and I'm planning on bringing it before the WRAC in May for a recommendation to the board to adopt the plan. So I want to just encourage you guys, if that interests you, to check it out and provide comments back to us, and the plan will be back for your recommendation in about 2 months. Yes, sir.
One last thing. There was a report that came out. It was called the Resilience Portfolio for the state of California, which was Gavin Newsom's report, and I think the public comment period just closed at the end of February. And it talks about what Governor Newsom's plan is for continuing on water stuff, but a lot of things are up in the air, like I said, because of what President Trump has done. But it also, we're trying to protect basins, and we're trying to do different things. And in that plan also talks about how they can fast track transferring, sale, exchange, and all kinds of things with water from different communities to other communities, which is, to me, completely opposite of managing a basin. When people think they can make money on the exchange, transfer of water credits, or any kind of other thing that manipulates groundwater, because all of groundwater has been always settled, or the controversy has been in the courts, where surface water has always been handled with permits and stuff. So I don't know if anybody looked at that report or studied it or commented on it, but it was out there.
It's actually rather disturbing. The Environmental Defense Fund's done an analysis of it, and the one thing it drops off, he's got prioritizing sustainable groundwater use done, sort of thing, with STIGNA, supporting regional coordination and multi-benefit projects, which is what WRAC is all about, expanding water transfers. The idea here is a resilience, overall resilience. That's the main theme of the plan. And the example has been given of Marin County, which almost ran out of water in the big 1977 drought, and water had to be piped across the bay to help the county out. But that was planned regionally that when that would happen, that it might happen, and it happened. So I would disagree that that is not important in a situation where a drought is coming and we don't know who's going to go down first. They're going to be maybe a city out there with no water, and they will need help. So I would disagree with the idea that we should not be considering transfers as part of the structure. But the last thing, it goes through a number of things, and it says what it has deferred is environmental considerations on species. And that is a little bit worrying. That is, it has all these ideas, but we won't talk about the species bit. And that, of course, involves the delta. It's an interesting read.
All right,
the
thank
delta,
you.
Which is a water transfer writ large.
Yes.
Thanks, David. Thank you, Greg, for bringing that up.
And again, delta will be back under item 6 because jurisdictions are being asked to pay for some of the enabling studies.
Okay. Let's see. Anything on the stormwater resource plan in particular?
Yes, Sarah here. Sarah Crable here with the County Public Works. The stormwater resource plan reached concurrence on the 25th of February. So I am prepping our program within the county, and we formed a working group with the RWMG, or within the RWMG, and there are 7 members of that working group. So we will be forming the process to review submitted projects that get submitted to the Stormwater Resource Plan, and it is anticipated that the Prop 1 Round 2 implementation funding will come open end of March or early April of this year. So the working group kickoff meeting for this will be in a couple weeks, and then we will meet again and have everything out to project components following that meeting. Anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Sarah. Let's see. There were various county water programs, policies, ordinances. I actually had a question. Yeah.
Excuse me, could you stand? I can't hear. Thank you.
Last Thursday on the 27th, we to Title 19 Title 22 to update the maps of the Paso Basin and the areas that are defined in the Paso Basin, and our language ordinance and our building code to match the maps that are used in the PSP, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. Currently, our maps take hold legal boundaries. We propose updating them to BWR 4.18 boundaries. I'll be presenting at the next meeting in April in detail about what the proposed changes are, and we will, within a few days, have interactive versions of those maps available to the public. If you have any questions, please.
Presenting here, anything?
Yeah.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I was at the Planning Commission meeting, so.
Oh, sorry, one more thing, Greg.
Go ahead.
The item got continued to April 23rd.
Okay.
So I went to the Planning Commission meeting to basically say that this proposal was going in front of the Planning Commission before coming to the WRAC. So the WRAC had no involvement in something that was being done that dealt with water over the basin, and it also was in the Pomo besides the Paso Robles Basin, and then also GSAs hadn't voiced an opinion on this, and so this is one of the reasons they continue it. Part of the problem with this stuff is there's nothing in Sigma that says a moratorium that the county imposes needs to match a map of whatever the county's doing. That has nothing to do with 118 boundary, Fugro boundary, or any boundary. It has to do with a specific area that's having a problem. And if they identified the areas that did have the problem, if they do have a map that shows those specific areas, and they concentrated on those instead of using a shotgun, we wouldn't be going through this effect. They were going to add 103,000 acres in the moratorium, which affected a lot of people with no map of underlying lots or who owned them, who was being taken out, and who was being added. So there's people being adversely affected and people being positively being affected for specific reasons. We want to know what those properties are, what's being done to do this, because even if you build a house over the basin, you have to pay for an offset. And it doesn't also include any marijuana that's being grown that's buying an offset that doesn't offset anything. So the whole process wasn't indicative of showing what really was going to happen and who was going to be involved. You cannot have a taking without compensation. You can't shut down people's rights and tell them they can't do something and then charge them a full tax on their property that they can't use. This information needs to come out, and this is why I went to the meeting, and I wanted it to come before WRAC so that we could have a discussion before April 23rd when it goes back to the Planning Commission. And we need to send a letter to the Planning Commission because there's a lot of planning commissioners that don't even know that WRAC exists or what it is.
Okay.
So they will hear it on the 23rd, and we do meet early in April.
Right. And it's currently, we'll have that presentation, and then we can weigh in accordingly at that time. Yeah, Dennis.
Yes. I also attended the Planning Commission, and I'm not going to continue with what Greg said, but it was rather surprising that they didn't know what WRAC was. They asked me, and I told them, well, it's been around for well over 20 years, and this is what we advise on, and they were surprised at that, which is, I was kind of shocked, truthfully, but we got into some elements of that. There was a following comment or component to their proposal, and the look-back period, and this is set to the emergency ordinance in 2022 to expire. It's kind of like the twilight zone period. I mean, it's pretty loosey-goosey from what I can see. And they got into a de minimis user exemption, and then that was stricken. And there was a lot of things that I think if it had come to WRAC, we could have clarified for them. The one thing I think they're going to need to do planning is define the de minimis user. It's for residential up to 2 acre feet, but they were trying to do a de minimis for 25 acre feet, but that's for commercial. That isn't within the definition of de minimis because it's commercial, not residential. There were things like pretty kind of things that we're aware of, but the planning commissioners were not.
Yeah.
So I think the WRAC going into this and trying to clarify some of those things would be very beneficial so that the planning commissioners can make an informed decision of what is going forth. There was some public comment on that. There was one individual who's in ag, I forgot his name, but he had a good point that when it gets to if they're following and they're been irrigating and then they come back to irrigate, the property right issue of having water available for their property is very important. That's where the value is. So that wasn't, in my mind, very clear for the planning commissioners to consider. It really needs to be because that's a very valuable component naturally for agriculture. One other comment, and Patricia made this one, I don't mean to steal your thunder, Patricia, but it was having the planning commissioners, and they go in to talk to planning, having one person that they deal with so that they have some continuity of what they're being told so that there isn't, the communication is clear and concise. I think that's very important. We have some ideas to bolster that, but at least that was I thought, a very relevant comment to be made, and hopefully the planning department will take that to heed and do something. So
Thank you.
Kind of it at that point, but the underlying issue here was that WRAC wasn't involved. Planning commissioners didn't really have sufficient information to make an informed decision, and if we had weighed in on it, I think they would have had a better opportunity.
Thank you. So it sounds
25-acre foot de minimis is not policy. It's a proposal not yet acted on,
right.
even for commercial.
Yeah. It seems like there is some significant issues that we'll be weighing in. Our next RAC meeting is April 1st. Feels like we're going to need a pretty robust staff report in order to have all of us ready to have a substantive conversation. Any other issues on that anyone wants to make sure is addressed? It sounds like kind of have a pretty good outline right now. Courtney?
Just maybe the Planning Commission materials could be forwarded to the RAC just as kind of starting point.
Yeah, unless they're already out of date. That would be my concern if, so if there's an update to that in order to reflect what was decided or not decided or any of that. Sure, David.
In regard to de minimis, is there a statewide clearinghouse where you can find out what's happening elsewhere so that there's a consensus of what de minimis? 25 seems a hell of a big number to me. I mean, it's
Well, there's de minimis with sigma, and that's defined in the regulations for sigma. De minimis is being used here just as a way to develop this ordinance. I just want.
It doesn't have to be the same number for different
I
ordinances.
just wanted to, since we have been talking about sigma too, I just wanted to make sure that
Yeah.
it's separated.
Okay.
There's sigma defined de minimis, but then de minimis could be defined in other ways for other
Applications. Okay. Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, this is the problem with what was being done in the thing. So if you look at Sigma, the de minimis user is 2 acre-feet or less. And you cannot be part of the problem. If everybody over the basin was a de minimis user and there's a problem, then all the de minimis users...
So Greg, I just want to make sure, we're going to talk about this on April 1st. Is it new information that should be introduced now, or do you want to wait
I just want to show the difference between, just like the county made an emergency ordinance for a reason, they created parts of that ordinance that they wanted to claim was okay in the county. It doesn't have to match or do what the states do, and the state is the bare minimum. Boom. You can go less, go more, but you don't need to change the terminology on what's being done. We have 500,000 acres over the basin, and 10% or less, but let's just say it's 10%, are irrigated. It means there's 450,000 acres that are de minimis users, which aren't causing the problem.
Okay, so we'll plant that seed for the conversation next month. All right. That covered what I want. Any other open reporting on water conservation opportunities, information, anything like that? Okay, great. Okay, item 5 is checking in on the, a year ago we sent out a letter. We had established the Water Conservation Ad Hoc Subcommittee, and we met several times. And then we drafted a letter to the Board of Supervisors, and it had 7 specific points. It's pages 19 and 20 in your agenda packets, and 21 and the following. So that report, we've made some progress on it, but we also have some open items. So I wanted to take a minute to go over each of those 7 points and see, kind of as we're planning out our new year for RAC, what things we want to pick up again or move forward. The very first item is convening a joint ALAB, the Agriculture Liaison Advisory Board, and a WRAC subcommittee in order to talk about strategies for water use and groundwater recharge in agriculture. Obviously super timely. So Linda Seifert was on this committee. There was others. Steph was on it. George was on it. And there was a little bit of initial work, and I'm going to pass out a memo from that. But otherwise, it has kind of stalled out. If you guys could think there is enough, you might need to share a little bit. You could just take one and pass them on. So we did identify this as kind of one of our most important opportunities, was to kind of coordinate with the agriculture community and be able to make recommendations for programs, funding, etc. Sorry, I could have given you one.
It's okay. I'll get one after.
All right. Was anybody else here part of that subcommittee for the ALAB? Does anybody remember being?
I was supposed to be on it.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Cynthia. What's that?
I can't be on it now because I've been pulled off of this committee and all the other committees I'm supposed to.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Thank you for being here anyway. All right, so it seems like so I guess I want to check in to see the goals of this effort. I think the last time that we talked about having the Farm Bureau help be a facilitator on this as well. So I wanted to see, one, do we still feel like this is meaningful work? Two, how do we want to, if we do want to continue with this effort, is there somebody that would, are there folks who'd be interested in serving? And then does this kind of the start of this list that Linda Seifert had put together with Steph, does this seem like we're on the right track? Anyone want to weigh in? David?
I'm just wondering whether we need to do this in view of the fact that this has to be done in the groundwater basins. That is, that the Ag has to agree with the rest of the world on how it's going to manage its water. And it would seem that whatever comes out of those basins is going to be more important and dominant legally than anything we can come up with. So.
Okay.
I would
Eric?
agree with that, except, of course, we're going to get to number 4, which deals with the fractured rock areas that are not scrutinized by the basin, through the basin process. And it may be that there would be an advantage to some kind of a limited group that would look specifically at those issues. But we can talk about that when we get to number 4.
Those fractured rock issues or those ag irrigation issues?
So basically, because the Sigma basins do pull all the stakeholders together, but we don't have a process in the fractured rock areas. And we have a number 4 here that pays attention to the fractured rock areas.
Mm-hmm.
My own thought that might be a way around this, because it's obviously very, very expensive to study all these little pockets one after another, would be to have an ordinance, something like they have in Napa County, where a zone of water deficiency is declared based on a certain set of findings. And in such a zone, if someone wants to drill a new well in a fractured rock area, they have to pay for the study. But I don't know, we're not there yet, but something like that might be a task for a joint ALAB-WRAC committee that would stay away from the things Sigma is already doing, but look at the areas where Sigma is not in operation.
Focusing on the non-SIGMA areas.
Yeah.
Okay, Greg, and then back.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with that. Okay. I think this could continue, and I think there's a lot of important things on here. People that live over the land have a correlated right to use the water equally, and there's been court decisions that have already happened that show what the communities and the cities have to do if we don't have surplus water. This stuff needs to be included in GSPs and other documents that show what they can and can't do if you're going to claim that there's a problem. And they have resources for other sources that they don't want to use. And they don't want to use them because they cost more. Well, that's not best management practice. That has to deal with money. And so if we're going to talk about best management practices and what people need to do, and I'll just use one example. If you have almost 6,500 acre-feet of Nazi water that gets turned over every year and you're not using it, and you're continuing to pump and you have no right to pump more than a certain amount, you're not using best management practice. You're using financial practice. And you shouldn't be paying $450,000 a month for a pipeline that's leaking in 2 places because you don't want to use the water. That's not the problem with the rest of the community. And the agriculture people, between the time the emergency ordinance was happened and today, there's 10,000 more acres of grapes that aren't being picked. That's not best management practices because they were planted for historic water use, not for producing a crop. And this is part of the problem with big ag versus local farmers and local people that are trying to make a living and take care of our community. So there's a lot of little parts to this stuff that needs to be looked into. And I'd be willing to be on the committee, but it needs, it's going to go to the GSAs in the specific areas that have the specific problems. But again, like I said before, the basin, and I'm going to go to Paso because that's where I'm at, and I live in the watershed area that delivers water to the basin. There's 500,000 acres, and there's 50,000 in irrigated ag. So there's a lot that the communities can do. 50,000 acres shouldn't be using 90% of the water.
Yeah, this group is much broader than the GSAs, and I think it's important that we keep the broad view here in front of all of us. So these points are all, we put the effort into talking about these things. We need to continue. If there are projects to be done, I think that the entire county is going to be affected, and the entire county needs to be involved in the decisions. So I would hope that we would continue to be active in this area. It's going to be the most important things that we do. And having a centralized source for best management practices would be very valuable. I've been asking for that for years from Cooperative Extension and others, and they always tell me how easy it is to get, and they can never get it. So if we can do it, great. Anything we can do to help is worth doing.
All right. Any other general comments? Right. And he's just not here today, right? He's still on WRAC. Yeah, Tim.
I guess I'm assuming that A-Lab is still in existence and still willing to meet with us.
Yeah, last I heard, and okay.
This historic water use issue, I think, should be one of the discussion points in the outline, honestly, because I know a lot of small growers that are utilizing best management practice for watering, but I have to advise them that, hey, the county's going to be looking at you at historic water use.
Right, so then they have to bump up their water use and to establish a record.
Pump up their water use just to get in the window of historic use if they ever want to do any new planting or any kind of new work.
Right.
It's really a dilemma.
Absolutely backwards. All right, so it sounds like maybe we can pick up where we left off. We have a little bit of an outline. There was interest from A-Lab. Do we have someone who would like to take point on convening this group? I'm actually, and I say that knowing, kind of hoping, but I'd be happy to shift over and be a part of that group and try to convene and see if we can move forward a little. So, Greg, George is still on it. Steph, you still willing? Anyone else want to join? Oh, yeah.
This is my first meeting, but representing the Farm Bureau, if you want to use the Farm Bureau, I'll be happy to help you. We have that. We have some of our members on that, so I'll be happy to help you.
Okay, terrific. And I'm sorry, tell me. Carter. Great. All right, so I will get that together. Thanks. And if anybody else wants to, wants to chime in, feel free to email or give a call. All right, how are we doing here?
We're good.
Good. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for kind of helping noodle through that. I don't want to spend too much time now, but let's just go ahead and touch on these other ones briefly. Recommend that WRAC work, so I'm back on the big list on page 19. Recommend that WRAC work with the county, the Partners in Water Conservation Committee to identify and implement additional urban landscape strategies, best management practices. We did have that one speaker that was terrific about the agriculture or the irrigation education program. There wasn't, kind of a pickup steam on something next to do with that. I'd like to stay in touch with the Partners in Water Conservation and be a partner, but otherwise kind of have them take the lead unless somebody has better ideas on moving forward with that work. Okay. And I'll check in with Michael Borman on that because I know he's one of the members there. Let's see. 3, extend the required implementation of water conservation measures to include areas when designated a level of severity 2 through the RMS system. That was Linda Chipping had kind of championed that as something to look at. I think there wasn't necessarily interest at the county level in picking that up. Do you have an update on that?
Just a little update. I did meet with planning to check in about this, and water conservation is still a recommended action just at level 3, LOS 3. But related to that, to the resource management system, the District 2 wasn't included in what was adopted in the board last year, and that's going to go before the board kind of in conjunction and in timing with the Los Osos community plan update, and they're trying to schedule that still to fit that piece in, and that's kind of the update related to that. Yes, sir.
With the level of severity 3, there is now a sort of a legal fine point difference between recognizing an area as being at level of severity 3 and certifying it as being at level of severity 3. Would we be making a similar distinction relative to level of severity 2, or it would require certification to have the conservation program, or is it simply identification, in other words, finding?
I think that would be a question best for planning, but I know in general the system is just supposed to raise a red flag in the sense to trigger then a later decision.
Yeah. I think level of severity 2 says a problem is coming, and addressing it before it's here is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so sounds like no further action on that one.
Yeah, I think the discussion will probably get opened up when planning, brings that next the District 2 RSR, that piece will come back. But
And it can come back to the WRAC before it gets to the Planning Commission.
That's the hope, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll try to keep a better tab on that. Okay, so let's see. 4, direct staff to plan, budget, prepare hydrological studies for non-Sigma basins, fractured rock sources where needed, to identify and prioritize water resource at-risk areas.
So I have an update for that.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. So regarding at least the Adelaide area, the county or the district and USGS are finishing all the contracting, the agreements to start the study there as directed by the Board of Supervisors. And so this is going to start kicking off later this month. And there's a website about the project up on the county page. You can access that through slocounty.ca.gov, Public Works, and then active projects, and it says Adelaide Hydrologic Study right at the top. It's the first active project. There's a mailing list to sign up for, and they expect the first public meeting kickoff to be in April. So that's kind of the main update about that. And as far as the countywide look, I think we'll touch on that at the budget presentation for the district next month.
Okay, any questions on that?
My comments from item 1 kind of refer to this as well. There are ways of, when the county budget can't handle it and there's an identified zone of deficiency, Napa County has an ordinance that's worth studying in that case.
Okay. See, number 5, recommend that WRAC work with staff to formalize, maintain, make available an online resource library of best management practices on water conservation. So I know, do you have an update on that too?
Yeah.
This is awesome. I'll just let you.
So with the WRAC website, many of you may have noticed we transitioned from slocountywater.org to county.ca.gov. And so regarding this number 5, if WRAC put together a list of resources, if that was provided to us, we could host that on our website. But that would have those resources would need to be provided to us, or those best management practices. And then I would just add that we can't endorse like specific products or contractors or consultants, but if there was a list and no comment in the back about, wanting to have this resource library, that's something that we could host on our WRAC webpage, but it would need to be provided by the group for us to link or put the links up. Yes, sir.
When was the website changed? I was trying to look at that.
In February.
Oh, I couldn't, but I figured it might have been why.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how much rain we got the storm over the weekend.
Okay.
I counted a drop.
Yeah, maybe like 700
Okay, so it sounds like if we can develop content that we have a place to host it.
Yeah.
Greg.
Yeah, we have the rainfall and reservoir updates all the time. How many county properties do we have in the unincorporated area that have wells, and do they have well intel, and how come that's not on one of these things, so we know what's going on in the basin from all the properties that are owned by the taxpayers? You
Sorry.
have fire stations, you have schools, you have all kinds of properties. Just in Crescent, we have 3 properties that could have well monitoring that don't. And we're looking for people in the community to tell us what their private wells are, and we have county properties that aren't being monitored. So all the fire stations throughout the area all have private wells that are owned by the county. Those properties are owned by the county. All the life, anything that's out in the county. I want to know why we're not monitoring that stuff and why it's not on a report, just like the rain in the reservoirs. This is part of one of the things that the state will help fund.
Do we know offhand?
I don't have an answer for that. I'll have to.
It's on our list. Yeah, we're
Okay.
continuously adding new wells to our program.
We've been talking about this for well over 2 years, but we see little traction.
So the idea is that we just don't have the physical infrastructure at the well to do the monitoring, or is it that we're not collecting and reporting the data that we have?
Well,
just so I understand it.
So we've developed a key well index that's on our water website. So if you type in Slow County Water, hopefully our site, our one-stop shop, shows up, and then one of the buttons on there is to our live data. One of the blocks in our live data, in addition to reservoirs, rain, and stream, is groundwater. And so you can open that up, and it gives a snapshot of the wells. As we get it in April and October, it updates. So we'll have, after we do the April level measuring, that graph will update for the various areas. So that's something that I haven't gotten to yet, looking at our inventory of who we have in our well program and an inventory of all our county properties and lining up to see who we're not covering yet. So it's on
How many county properties are you trying to monitor? Sorry.
I have to do that analysis. I haven't done that yet.
But it's in the work plan, or it's not even in the work plan right now? It is, okay. All right, great. All right, so in terms of the actual item here for this resource library, now, David, I know when we were on that ad hoc that you had a whole bunch of different resources. Do you think those are still relevant? Are those in a format that could be useful?
I haven't looked at them for a while. So
yeah.
Probably at the bottom of the shoebox somewhere.
Yeah. Well, it seems like we were including that kind of based on some of the information you were finding. So if you get a chance if you think you have something to contribute to that site, does anybody else think that they have resources or want to spend some time like looking at that website for best practices? Of course, it only is helpful if it is robust enough that people would think to go there. Yeah.
It seems to me we ought to be talking to NRCS and UC Cooperative Extension first. And I told you I'd ask. If somebody else asked, I'll actually do it. They have them. They've just been scattered about.
Yeah.
Are we free to just send stuff to Brenda?
I think so. I mean, if anything looks controversial, I'm sure we'll hear about it. But otherwise, yeah, I think if we have resources and if we get a bunch, then we're going to want to spend some time kind of organizing them in a way so that they'd be useful. And if we wanted, if it would be helpful for WRAC to draft a letter to NRCS, I'm not even sure, that comes from WRAC requesting this, I'm happy to, review that if we think that would have some bearing as kind of like, hey, this whole entity needs your resources. Maybe? Okay. Let's see. Then that's item 6 is groundwater recharge. Just in general, we need, what are the barriers and opportunities? I don't know if you have thoughts on that one.
It would be mostly rehashing things I think that have already been discussed. That stormwater recharge was included in the Paso GSP, and we have a stormwater resources plan now. So if entities who are eligible for that grant funding have a project that they want to pursue, that funding is available to apply for them now. And the other note I have here is that landowners are encouraged to work with the RCDs for smaller scale projects or opportunities in this regard. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we have Prop 1 money that's available that came available in February, March. I think it's like $90 billion.
It's not available yet, but
okay. But
yeah.
So do we have any projects in the work? Is there any staff people pursuing the grant applications that we put in the GSPs or the GSAs in any of the 5 or 6 basins? And if so, what are we doing?
From, you mean county staff or any staff of any agency?
Well, yeah, I can't write the grant. I'm not the GSA. The county is the GSA. We put in our GSP that we want to use stormwater capture. Stormwater capture money is available. I want to know who's working on it to make sure we get that money that's available, that we have projects in the work. We have 4 rivers in North County. 3 of them start and end in North County. 1 of them starts in North County and ends at the ocean through Monterey. It'd be the Wera, the San Juan, the Estrella, and the Salinas. Those are our main points of recharging our basin. Those have all the alluvium in them. We have the map to show the contours, the ground, the rivers, everything. What are we doing to show the state to give us money to make recharge areas?
Cindy, what would be the process for those to kind of get into the program for for grant programs?
So
Anyone?
I guess I'll just say for the Stormwater Resource Plan, projects do have to be submitted, and it's an implementation grant, so these projects will have to have gone through quite a bit of design work, and so the timing on that should be considered since the GSPs were just recently finished.
So they have to be shovel ready in order to get money.
Yes, that's.
Well, that is not what they said at the workshop. So I went to a 4-hour workshop that the state put on at Paso Robles and said they didn't have to be shovel ready. You just have to have the project and show us what they're doing, and then you move through the thing. So if we have all the other documentation we need, we have a consultant that put this documentation in the GSP. So I want to know what staffers are working on these projects. If there isn't any, when we start an ad hoc committee, we'll do it. We need to get the money that's being available to do the projects that we want to do that's going to help our basin. We don't need to talk about it for 6 more years.
I'm not sure that this is is necessarily the best venues, because it sounds like that's pretty specific to that basin, but
Well,
maybe we
have 6
need a
basins
better.
We have 5 or 6 basins that got almost $6 million to do their GSPs that came from Prop 1. We need to do this in all these basins.
If we just added the words sought or budgeted in the last line there, should be identified and necessary resources sought or budgeted. That makes it clear that we can be looking for grants as well as just pulling it out of our budget.
Just for the county side, the staff we have assigned to work on stormwater has been working on the plan that needs to be in place to be eligible for grants, and that just finished. So, there's also the project, I would say, that we are working on. The staff that we have that just finished the GSP is now working on the Salinas River option of stormwater recharge. So that's one of the rivers where it looks like there may be more opportunity to put high flow, to use for diversions. So that is something we've been working on. So the other area is probably Rio Grande Creek. There's been a lot of work. I was going to mention this in the statewide presentation. We have that locally, that issue of operating our reservoirs, meeting riparian water rights needs, meeting environmental needs. So the Rio Grande Creek is another area where a lot of our internal staff has been focused on how do we best meet all of those needs in operating our reservoirs and recharging the groundwater basin and making sure people don't flood and making sure the ecosystem is in good health. So that's what I can say we are doing internally.
All right.
And then anyone is eligible, unlike the IRBM program, we did this plan so that anyone who has a project can be eligible if they go through the vetting process and make sure that it's identified in that plan. So that's what Sarah and the consultant teams and others, I think, that have been working on that, have been working so hard on with the State Water Board, and it's actually a pretty big deal that they finally approved our countywide plan that is making all of those eligible. So something to celebrate.
Yes.
And take a moment, and I just want to thank Sarah and Brendan for pushing through on that, because there was a lot of back and forth that was a little bit frustrating at times.
Right. So it sounds like we're going after, we have projects, we're going after money. It's not necessarily queued up to do what has just been put into a GSP. Is that?
We had to do first things first.
Uh-huh.
And we're working to understand the regulatory framework and thinking ahead to, water rights issues that are inherent in any sort of stormwater capture effort. Also encouraging, if landowners can manage their own properties in a way that enhances recharge, although that takes away from what gets to the creeks and rivers, just trying to balance all those things. And in my mind, our framework internally is all of the above. So, I keep thinking about that Venn diagram, and I've got it in the state water presentation coming up, but that's the way we're trying to function in response to all these important needs for water.
Right. Thanks, Courtney. Did you want to?
On Craig's point, the EPC and the Shannon San Juan Water District have hired a consultant to identify places to best suited for groundwater recharge in our areas, because nothing's happened, and I've been coming to these meetings for over 40 years. We still don't have projects, so that's what we're doing. We're moving ahead whether or not anybody else is.
All right, thank you. All right, I kind of want to wrap this up so that we can get on to the next item. Is that all right? Well,
real quick, I just want to say I appreciate the staff. I appreciate Courtney. I know they work hard, and people get assigned certain things. It's frustrating for people that are out in the community that I had 1,000 acre-feet of water run off my ranch last year. I can't just go take my dozer and dig a pond and go to jail for water court because I did something. And we need to have specific things that ranchers and different people can do, because we're not stopping the water. We're storing the water that still is going to go to the basin one way or another. And we need, the state is telling us to do certain things, and then on the other hand, they're handcuffing us. And so we're just asking for the right to help everyone in our community fix our issues.
Right.
So before we wrap this up, I'm hearing a couple different things that may be useful in having some presentation here at the WRAC relative to these recharge projects, and potentially, like Greg said, maybe there's something that can be done to present what smaller users can do, as part of the recharge program. Just throwing that out there. It's sort of like items on item 7 there.
Yeah, good idea.
Management practices in the building community. There are builders who use them. There are definitely ways to landscape and situate homes and businesses that are more infiltration friendly than others. There's even things like gravel beds underneath eaves and little sort of chain things that the water comes down instead of going.
Right, low impact development. All right, well, thank you for that. Right, and then the 7th one is, we alluded to, is keep having speakers and topics, and we'll talk about that at the end. All right, thank you, everyone, as we continue on that. So our next item is State Water Project Overview, which it sounds like, are you introducing, or you, Courtney?
Courtney's got it.
Courtney's got it.
Courtney Howard, County Public Works. I'm the Water Resources Division Manager. For some of you, this is a repeat performance, maybe even twice. Went to our state water subcontractors to start introducing a lot of the activity that's happening at the state level and what we see coming as future decisions that the board might have to make. Also went to the board February 4th and just tried to give the overview of what the State Water Project is and what it means to our county, and just start to introduce some of the policy level activities that we may be coming back to the board with for decisions, and wanted to do the same for you. There's people, was there people here in the 90s, so, you know, in the Fremont, you know, when all that was going on?
Oh, yeah.
So you
the
can help.
take-or-pay contracts, the indentured trust, going to the Central Coast Water Authority meetings when they still met in Buellton City Hall.
Yeah, so it's a lot of similar things that are coming again, you know, in terms of philosophies around the State Water Project and what it means to our county, and what is the long-term use of state water in our county going to look like. So it's going to be a lot of that balanced discussion of kind of the triple bottom line there. So anyway, it'll be a repeat for some of you, but I'm hoping for others who have not been introduced to state water that'll bring you up to speed on some of the basics and some of the, you know, discussions that we're going to have going forward, so that hopefully people can be kind of starting in the same place as best we can. So I'm just going to kind of do just a State Water 101 and then move into what those current issues are. So back in the 60s, I think someone mentioned earlier, it's kind of a giant stormwater diversion project with a reservoir. The state decided to take water from where it is in the north and provide a conveyance system to get it to various communities, farms throughout the state. The reservoir is Lake Oroville up in the north outside of Chico there to the east. It uses a series of rivers, and then mainly the Sacramento River, to have it conveyed south. And then it goes through what's called the Delta, which is where the Sacramento River, the San Joaquin River from the south, and the San Francisco Bay intersect. And so the project utilizes this network through the delta of levees, both natural structures and human-made structures, to get it through and to a pumping plant that's at the south end of the delta, which is called pumping plant. Clifton Fort, thank you. And so that pumps it out of the delta and into a canal system. So you'll see the main canal if you're driving up I-5. And the project, there was 29 entities or agencies that signed up in the 60s. The San Luis Obispo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District was one of those 29. And so hopefully you know by now that the Flood Control District, for short, is the same boundary as the county, and it has the same 5 board members, but it's technically a separate entity. So at the time, our flood control district looked at the planning documents and said we project needing 25,000 acre feet a year of this project for the various needs that were identified at that time, and so that's what the district signed up for. I want to mention that Santa Barbara County Flood Control and Water Conservation District also signed up at that time, and so they're a participant as well. The agencies that signed up at the time in Santa Barbara County ended up forming a joint powers agency, and they're called the Central Coast Water Authority. So the Flood Control District for Santa Barbara has the contract with the state, but then there's agreements in place for the Central Coast Water Authority to do most of the legwork associated with the agencies that take state water in Santa Barbara County. So I'm going to say CCWA, Central Coast Water Authority, when I'm referring to the use of state water in Santa Barbara County. We didn't do that here. The Flood Control District is the contract holder with the state. And I'm going to our allocation of 25,000 acre feet a year is what we signed up for. It's a pretty small percentage overall. And I have another graphic in a minute to talk about that. So when the state built it through the 60s and 70s, they ended up doing the canal and then a turnout to a place called Devil's Den, which is kind of in that triangle of I-5, 41, and 46. And so that's where we have our 25,000 acre feet a year capacity in the canal. Fast forward to the early 90s, Santa Barbara County agencies were ready to take state water and build the rest of the infrastructure from that turnout at Devil's Den all the way down to Santa Barbara County. They said, San Luis Obispo County, are you ready? How much do you need? And so we asked the agencies in the county, how much do you want? And when it came down to it, I'm going to use round numbers, the agencies in our county signed up for about 5,000 acre feet a year of that 25,000 acre feet a year. There was a decision at that time, do we not participate because our communities aren't needing as much yet? Do we participate to our full 25,000 acre feet a year, thinking in the future maybe there'll be more? Or do we just sign up for the 5,000 acre feet a year? And so that's what happened. We decided to do the 5,000 acre feet a year. And so when the infrastructure got built from Devil's Den all the way down to Santa Barbara County, we got about a 9% share of that infrastructure.
An interesting historical note, I know Steve will remember this too, way back, the WRAC. If you think we've had places where we don't see eye to eye, there were 3 distinct minority reports that came from the WRAC on that question, each of which one was for the full 25,000, one was for what the contractors were ready for now, and one was for keep out of it. All 3 reports went from the WRAC to the board. So it was quite an interesting time on the WRAC.
Anyway, the Central Coast Water Authority they ended up building and they own the treatment plant. They built the pumping plants that go up and over the grade from Devil's Den and the pipeline, but DWR owns that pipeline. So it's a little, anyway, it's not too detailed, but there's a lot of different contractual arrangements and ownership arrangements. So, and that was finished in 1997. So here's another representation of our flood control district and how it relates to all the 29 contractors at the state level. So Metropolitan Water District of Southern California is a big user, Kern County is a big water user, and then there's many smaller users, but together we make up another pretty big share, so about a third for the different participants. So they tend to negotiate, and then we tend to negotiate amongst ourselves, and then we try to, and then the state wants us to kind of come up with our proposal to have one kind of a contract that all the 29 can live with. That's a preview of what's coming here in a minute. This is what it looks like locally. So these are the local agencies that take state water throughout our county. Shandon in the North County, we've got Morro Bay, California Men's Colony, County Op Center, and Cuesta College on the Toro Valley turnout. And then we've got Pismo, Oceano, San Miguelito, Avila Valley, Slow Coastal. The last 4 there are in the Avila area on the Lopez turnout.
Courtney, is that figure for Morro Bay the regular allotment and the buffer allotment of equal amounts, or is the buffer double that? Up to that.
Right. I did not put the drought buffer in this graphic. I have one at the end that I could pull up if we wanted to see more of the drought buffer.
Okay, so the Morro Bay basically is paying for 26 to hold their 13.
Right.
Okay.
Also not in the graphic here is the Nipomo, because they're getting it through Santa Maria's allocation, but it is coming into the county kind of backwards.
Yeah, it's mixed. With Santa Maria's mixed supply that they get. Santa Maria takes state water.
Courtney, what happened to the water in the San Luis Reservoir up between Gilroy and San Jose? I thought that was what this was.
Yeah, I'll get that out in a minute. Let me get back to that. So a little more on our local facilities before I go back to the state, how it works together. So here's kind of a zoom in on the infrastructure that comes from Devil's Den and through our county. Again, we have the 25,000 acre feet a year to Devil's Den, and then again the 9% through the pumping plants, and then through the treatment plant and then up to the Chore Valley turnout, which is kind of behind the school, Cal Poly. We have our Chore Valley line that goes out to the Highway 1 users, I'll say. And then it continues down to the Lopez turnout, and so it necks down to the 2392, which is the total of those Lopez turnout state water users. And then after the Lopez turnout, we don't have any capacity rights. Going back to the Delta, this is where I think some of the discussion was talking about earlier. So not only do you have what the hydrology provides year to year, depending on the snowpack and rainfall and everything, you also have to take into consideration the timing of the different species there and the way they pump the water and how that impacts water quality. And so there's been a lot of studies and different biological opinions that have come out that have contributed to the way they operate through the Delta. And so they have this very intense model of the whole Delta that takes all of those variables into account. And there's, based on some of the science and some of, it's continuing to evolve. That's why we kind of have what's into the future as we get more and more information on how that Delta is behaving. And I'll note that, the State Water Project is just one of many stressors on that Delta. And so there's some, bigger picture questions going on. You'll hear something about the voluntary agreements. And, the voluntary agreements is the bigger picture for all of the, use of that Delta system, of which the State Water Project is a component. So when we talk about the Delta, this is kind of the crux of the matter is how, if in terms of stormwater capture, how much and when can you take off that stormwater in a way that won't harm the environment? And so that's a lot of the concerns that in looking at this project and how it should be operated. A lot of competing issues. So what does that mean for us locally? Because we have that excess allocation, in most of the years, we're able to provide the 5,000 acre feet a year. Now, going back to the San Luis Reservoir, in our contracts, I'm going to go back. Sorry. So here's San Luis Reservoir south of the Delta. In our contracts, we have a share of storage in this reservoir. And it relates to the type of water year it is, and if it's a wet year, then they need more of that storage for current year operations. And so they kind of just give us a proportionate share of our 25,000 acre feet that we can use. But it is subject to spill in the wet years because they want to use more of that reservoir for the current year operations. So going back to our local reliability, because we have that proportionate share, we were able to store some of this unused water to meet our needs in 2014 when we were down to 5%. So in single year droughts, we're in pretty good shape, but if it was wet and then it spilled and then it was dry, there's certain scenarios where it's a little more risky, but for the most part, we're pretty reliable because we have this excess allocation. So that's why it can be a little bit confusing. But that storage component in San Luis Reservoir is important for us so that when we have multi-year droughts, we can, that helps.
Real quick, Corky. So when we're storing that water, the subcontractors that the county sells water to, they pay for a certain amount. And the rest of the taxpayers are paying for the total amount so that we can give them water when we're short. So there's a lot of people paying for this benefit that don't get it.
Yeah, Article 10 in the contracts between us and the agencies that take state water says that if we have the water available, the flood control district, then we need to deliver it. So that's why it gets delivered to the subcontractors. They entered into drought buffer agreements because the flood control district started to think about, okay, maybe we need to get rid of that excess allocation and get it off the tax roll. The county board in 2003 said we need to do a master water report and figure out what are our long-term needs before we make that decision. Finished the master water report in 2012. Sigma hit. We've been a little bit diverted. we're coming back again to this question. And that's what I'll get into in a couple of slides. The flip side is that the flood control district does have water, and since we're limited in what we can store in San Luis Reservoir, this water could have been available to transfer, and I'll get to that in a minute. They did have a multi-year drought. We were able to enter into a multi-year program where we're able to sell our excess here and here to get cost recovery for what we have been spending on it to make sure we have it for the long term. And I'll get into that in a minute, water management tools amendment that is imminent, hopefully, that would make that easier. I'll get to that in a minute. But we do have unused water that if we could find a way to put it to use to meet our needs locally in a way that is affordable, that's something we're exploring, which I'll get to in a minute. So if we didn't have that excess allocation, on the flip side, the agencies, the communities that take state water would have been short in 5 years in this span that we looked at. So again, the importance of understanding our local needs in terms of making these long-term decisions, and not only the communities that currently rely on state water, but how can state water help with these other needs that we're identifying going forward, in addition to any other, it's kind of all of the above. How does this fit in with all the other things that we're looking at? Thinking about that as we're trying to make these decisions. So these are the 3 near-term amendments you see to the main contract between the flood control district and the state, as well as all the other 28. One of those tools, I'm going to walk through each one. So I just want to mention again what, the way staff is currently operating under this current framework of trying to find a balance between having a diverse long-term water portfolio for our county, maintaining the essential water supply for the communities that do take state water, and also trying to reduce the district-wide taxpayer obligations. So as we're thinking about all these things and trying to provide information, at least from a staff perspective, we're trying to keep all this in mind and come up with a balanced way of communicating all of this information. And the first one I want to talk about is, for the state water project, is the water management tools amendment, where that would open up more flexibility to put that water to use and get some cost recovery, but still maintain, ownership of that for the long term to meet needs like the housing mandates that are coming, any basins that start to be stressed, environmental needs. How can we put that water to use in the long term, but kind of reduce the cost of that insurance, so to speak, as we're trying to maintain it. So we think that this amendment will help us do that, and this is a common interest amongst all the 29 contractors, is recognizing that water is going to be harder and harder to steer into the future, but it's hard to afford it now and when you're not putting it to use, and that's what's frustrating. I think that's what we've heard today. We've done some studies already, one of them which is how much more water could we push through the infrastructure. And so one of the model runs, we did various model runs to say, what if you tried to get it all out at Lopez turnout? What if you tried to get it all out at Santa Barbara County turnout? So it varies. So I just kind of picked out one model scenario, and you can go on our website, the State Water website, the capacity studies there. But there's a lot of capacity in the North County reach, just because of hydrology, and you could take it out without impacting how much you could get at Lopez or Santa Barbara County. So that, I thought that was interesting.
So, Courtney, we'd have to have an agreement with CCWA to do that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll tell you in a minute. So, and again, there's different, the upshot is that there's more water we could push through if we can negotiate with Central Coast Water Authority on how to make use of that.
Does part of that have to do with the capacity for pressure in the pipeline?
Yeah.
In other words, I remember when the professional engineers in California government sued to try to get double lap wells instead of single lap wells on that line. And looking back, they were right.
Yeah, lots of things like that can factor into it. And I forgot what I was going to mention. Oh, the pumping plants, they're sized for off-peak pumping. And now with just the way energy is working now, there's kind of less off-peak pumping. And so we could use it 24 hours. It's probably not much of a difference anymore with energy. So that's another something to look at, that there's even the pumping plants, there's capacity there too. So.
And where is that stored, Courtney? Is that Whale Rock and San Luis Reservoir? I mean, if you up the capacity of the...
Well, that's the thing. We don't have storage for it. We're looking at Lopez Reservoir opportunities mainly because of the connection with the Lopez Zone 3 participants. But that is a study we want to do. Some of the studies we've already done, combining those and working with CCWA. We hope to get this going in July. We're working on the RFP right now. Oops, sorry, this one. Just look at the Water Management Tools Amendment and what it means to us. Look at the capacity study we did. Look at our needs. Santa Barbara's got to look at their needs and figure out different ways we can put the water to use and get some of that cost recovery. Again, trying to balance those three things in looking at the different options. What we're already doing as well is where can we put inner ties where we don't have them already in our county? So we're working with some of the wholesale agencies, like the people that participate, agencies, I meet with people, but the agencies that participate in Nacimiento, Zone 3, State Water, working with them to say, okay, where do we not have interconnectivity that we could to help move water around our county? So that's one study that we're currently working on, and I hope to come back to the WRAC with what we're finding. And really, we're just taking the Master Water Report, Urban Water Management Plans, a lot of the other studies that have already been done, and just trying to pull that together in a story about where could we put interties and mutual benefit agreements that don't exist already. So it's kind of an audit. The other one is an effort Carolyn Bird's leading, is the Regional Infrastructure and Housing Plan. Again, dealing with the mandates for additional housing that we need to account for in our county, and what are the barriers to accommodating that housing. Big part of it's water and infrastructure, roads and everything. So I'm working with her on how these studies can help inform decisions related to that. So she's got her own plan through that lens as well. So, and all of this is going to culminate, in my mind, to an update to our state water policies and also inform some of these discrete decisions about contract amendments for the state water project.
Courtney, I have a question for you. It seems like this is moving more rapidly than assessments of some less expensive water resources that we identified in GSP. Are we going to get to it having to make a decision on how much state water we take before we have a chance to look at whether we can do other projects that might provide the same amount of water at a lower cost?
I think the other framework we're operating in is an all of the above. So again, we're not stopping looking at Nacimiento and how to put it to use. We're not stopping looking at how do we optimize the operation of Salinas Dam to make use of other water that might be available. We're not stopping looking at Zone 3. We're going back to the RCDs, and my understanding George Kendall had a good kind of pilot of how to work on your individual farms and encouraging that as well. So in my mind, trying to keep all of it moving. And so the GSP talked about, how do we do stormwater management, and then recycled water system with the city of Paso, moving down, Central Coast Blue. So all of these things in my mind are moving around along a parallel.
Hi, Courtney. Did I see your map correctly that there's 301 acre feet available at Lopez? Is that the excess pipeline capacity?
Yeah, under that particular scenario.
Okay, and I remember in 2010 there was an excess pipeline capacity study, and it was 3,000 acre feet.
Right. There are other scenarios where if you wanted to get it all at Lopez, then you could get more there, but it's at the expense of maybe Santa Barbara County. So I wanted to be a little bit conservative there.
Wait, isn't that, I recall at the time that there was 3,000 acre feet on the table and 500 acre feet was going to be taken by the county, and then the residual 2,500 was going to be split 50-50 between county subcontractors and the CCWA. Is
That's
that
a
not,
concept.
that's still the concept?
Right, so that would be one of
Sure.
the concepts we'd include in this study right here. So those were
So it'd be a swap. in
trying
effect.
to advance those ideas and figure out which one makes sense. That's the point of that study. Yeah.
Courtney, wasn't Kern Water Bank putting state water into the ground? They were buying state surplus and storing it and then using it both in Kern Water Bank, and I believe they were doing some sales out of the bank to other areas. So we were talking about storage here. Are we just talking about looking for surface storage? Is there a geologic study done on the feasibility of actually taking that water and recharging some of the deficit basins?
It was looked at in the Paso Basin, about 8 years ago?
2008.
Yeah, a long time ago, yeah. It was found to be fair to middling at best, and it didn't look at the governance and legal issues such as you have a well, you think it's your water, the well comes up, and then you find out that it's someone else's water, and that study didn't go into those angles of it.
Yeah.
But I think there were like 3 specific zones in the Paso Robles Basin that were looked at, and a couple of them were kind of very marginal, and one was maybe modestly, possibly to be successful.
Yeah, and I think what I anticipate with this study too is how can those existing storage programs in the valley, mostly they're in the valley, be utilized in a way to help us store south of Delta more. In our county, we have our export ordinance, so it would be pretty challenging to do a banking type project in our groundwater basins because you can't extract and send it anywhere. But again, going back to as the GSP starts to get implemented and the stakeholders there want to look at projects, do the folks that would have to reduce pumping want to buy into the state water project for direct delivery in lieu of pumping? That could be, it wouldn't be a recharge and recovery thing. It would be just a direct in lieu delivery as a way to reduce their pumping.
Right.
Base.
Use state water instead
Right.
of well water. Yeah. Interesting.
They're not looking at state water now, to my knowledge. They're looking at unused Nasciano first and recycled water.
So when do you think you're going to get to that water management amendment study?
The study, we hope to start July 1 when we have the budget,
really?
but we're intending to go to the board with a joint funding agreement with CCWA. So we're going to, and then we're developing the RFP right now.
So is that management agreement with CCWA going to deal with things like capacity becoming available during state water shortages? When Santa Barbara County can only get 23,000, there's a lot of capacity.
Yeah, we'll have to analyze the different scenarios and our different needs and what position we might be in. Similar to what we're doing with this study, this regional water infrastructure resiliency, we're looking at what are the scenarios where we're vulnerable and thinking about, okay, if this community lost water, could we get water to it somehow? What are the agreements we need or the interties we need or agreement? It's the same kind of concept we would want to cover with CCWA in terms of a neighbor-to-neighbor.
Who's heading up that plan?
This project?
The resiliency one.
This one? That's myself.
You're doing it?
Yeah.
You got nothing
again,
else
I hope
to do,
come,
right?
It's adding up, isn't it? Right.
So, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to go to the Board of Supervisors and ask for $1 million to be part of Newsom's plan. And this is for the one tunnel project because they want to start work on what they want to do. And we have 10 subcontractors, and you being the main contractor for Shandon. The last 3 years, Shandon hasn't used their 100 acre feet. They've used less than 50. Why do we spend $1 million for something that's not using their water? Why do we have $7.2 million from the county taxpayers paying for the Nacimiento pipeline that has 2 leaks and they're not using all their water? This is diverted water from Northern California. We're trying to do stormwater projects here that's diverted water in our own county. And all of the basis of the percentages of water that go to the subcontractors is based on the 25,000 acre feet, and the contractors are only paying for less than half of that. The rest of the taxpayers are paying for it. I don't understand how you can ask the taxpayers to keep paying for benefits they don't receive, and the state wants you to build more houses. Good. Provide the 100% of state water that they sell you.
Yep, that's definitely speaking to trying to address all those issues. So I want to go back just a minute here with, so this is one of the contract amendments that is, we think is probably going to come out first in terms of language. And it's, if they don't, a lot of the things I'm hearing is if this amendment isn't in place, then doing the Delta Conveyance project is going to be pretty hard because we can't afford that, to hold on to that water for the long-term needs. But I want to, so this is one decision point. And then the Delta Conveyance project is another, which Greg was starting to get into there. So again, going back to the Delta, DDR's position, and you can see some of this language in the contracts, is that the intention was to get off reliance of the Delta at some point. And so over this last, even since the 60s when it was first signed, they've been trying to figure out what is that infrastructure project that you would do to take you around the Delta. And so here we are talking about the Delta Conveyance project. It's had many names over the last few decades. But I just want to make sure we're on the same page about, again, why this project is being proposed and what are the current negotiations look like between the state and the 29 contractors, and what the preliminary cost estimates and reliability benefits look like.
Now, subcontractors have been asked, I know it was on the Morro Bay agenda, to participate in costs of studying this thing. Is the county also going to be asked, or is it just the subcontractors, and is there a penalty for saying no?
So that's part of what's being negotiated is if we don't say anything, there's a chance it could just be imposed, and then again it gets split between the countywide taxpayers and the subcontractors. But they're negotiating, but we need the water management tools to make this project go. We're a pretty small player, so honestly we're just kind of watching what happens between the state and some of the more bigger players in it. And what we're trying to figure out locally is if this thing goes forward, how are we going to be on this project or not? So they're sort of watching what is going on in the state and what looks like might happen, and then how we're going to react to it as a county. Sort of the framework we're operating under right now, just trying to keep up and keep everyone informed because it's continuously evolving. But I do want to mention that it's the flood control district that would ultimately decide, and we would just get subcontractor input. So, and it's important what the subcontractors, those communities that rely on state water have to say, but the board has to balance that with the district-wide taxpayers as well. So trying to balance that again going forward. So again, it's the Delta Conveyance project is one tunnel that takes it from the north part of the Delta off the Sacramento River and brings it south of that Clifton Court pumping plant that I mentioned earlier. It's about 30 to 40 miles. The improvement has been updated. I should have updated this. They're still trying to use the models to analyze the benefit. It would increase it about 13%, they're saying today. So a little bit less than these numbers were the last version of the Delta Conveyance project, which was Cal Water Fix, which was 2 tunnels. And at that time, the Central Valley Project, which is the federal project to bring water south from Lake Shasta to farmers, relies on the Delta as well. So now that that federal project is not a part of it, they're updating all the models and analysis to refine some of these numbers. The concept is the same, though, in terms of why they're doing this project or want to do this project. And that's to get off the delta and the sensitivity of water quality at that interface, and the pumps actually reverse flow in the San Joaquin River. It's very susceptible to seismic risk. They did a model that said 50 of those levees breaks and then it all gets salty if a 6.5 magnitude earthquake happens. Just the current challenges with it and the future challenges with it is why they're looking at providing that alternative route to get it to all of the communities and farms that depend on that water. And a lot of the challenge of defining that benefit is how much can you take off and when of that river system without harming the environment and harming those riparian users, farmers that have a water right as well. And so outside but influencing the benefits of this project is the discussion under the voluntary agreements and how that whole delta system should be allocated and operated.
These are the same guys that are building the high-speed rail?
I've been trying not to say train. Do we want to get on this tunnel? The estimate right now is $230 an acre foot for the construction cost for our agency.
That's capital cost.
Yes. So where are we right now? So back when it was, even before Cal Water Fix, it was like the Delta Habitat Conveyance Project. So back in like 2010, we had gone to the board and asked, do we want to pay for the design and environmental review of this project? We said yes at the time. The project's evolved, and here we are at the one tunnel project, and here we are again at the question of, do we want to have a proportionate share in this project, and do we want to contribute to the preliminary funding to get it through CEQA and design? So we anticipate if the negotiations go in a way that results in a proposed contract amendment, the first step is an agreement in principle that we would all sign that outlines how it would all work, how the project would work, and how the contract would be amended. It's not the actual contract amendment language, but it provides that guidance for the state when they're writing it up. And then ultimately in a year or two, the contract language would be there. We would have gone through CEQA for the Delta Conveyance project itself. And then at that point, there'd be another decision point to actually sign the amendment. So in the near term, we think, by summer, what the board might be asked to do is sign an agreement in principle and decide whether or not they want to keep the door open and be a part of the benefit of that project, which is, again, resiliency in terms of getting off of dependence on that levee system and being able to convey water differently down south.
So the $230 an acre foot is a one-time lump sum payment, right? Or is that an annual cost?
It would be an annual cost.
So $200 to the county?
Ongoing.
Right.
$5-6 million.
For that 30 or 40-year amortization cost.
But that's the price to pay for the pipe. That's not the actual cost of the water. Because doesn't it cost us $1,500 an acre foot when the water gets here?
I have a cost slide at the end that I'll get to.
It's an added cost.
Yeah, it's an added cost, right.
Does the pipeline also serve Delta, Mendota, and Westlands? Because the fed water is coming down from Shasta, and it's going to go through the same pipe, isn't it?
No. Cal Water Fix had them. This project does not. So that's the big change, is that the federal agencies are not.
Separate the federal water from the state water. It's easy.
Molecule by molecule.
Sure.
It's different color.
So the cost, the 230 was capital cost. The next 3 to 5 years is the design and CEQA costs. The estimate for that over the next 3 to 5 years is about $2.5 million. So again, the near term, what we would expect going to the board with, the contract amendment associated with the water management tools. What I didn't mention is that the current contracts have a limitation on what you can sell annually. You have to use the turnback pools, and that's not like a market rate. It's pretty low, like $12 or $24 an acre foot, which doesn't get you much cost recovery. This would open it up to more of a market sliding scale depending on the hydrology. So part of that, once we get the contract language, is working with CCWA on how that might benefit the use of state water locally. And then the other decision is about how reliable do we want that state water? Do we want to be able to have an allocation through that tunnel rather than solely relying on what might happen in the delta? So that's the other question.
So do we have an idea of the improvement in reliability?
About 13%.
13%.
Yeah.
That's the latest.
Yeah, so that's one element. The other element is if the levees break, what is there's a evaluation of the benefit of having that alternative route.
I guess we don't want to call it the peripheral power.
So that goes to the Board of Supervisors, May or June.
Yes.
Is it coming back to WRAC for a review and a recommendation, or is it just going
In May, I would hope to come back to the RAC.
Okay.
And maybe it's a three-way thing, or maybe it's one vote on one motion, but
Will there be 3 choices like there were with state water? None of the choices then could get a majority, so that's how we ended up with 3 reports.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's the second one's kind of a moving target. They have said that they want to get the language for the water management. Sorry, I'm pointing at that. They say they want to get this out by the end of March. This one's more fluid. The next, they're negotiating today, like at 3 or something. Maybe they're done. But next Wednesday is the next state contractors public negotiation. So you can go to the state's website and if you want to tune in, and see how that's going. But that's definitely the more dynamic right now. Because there's diverse interests amongst those 29 contractors. And the state only wants one contract to manage. The other one that's a little bit further out is the contract
Maybe
extension.
just have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so this one we anticipate coming later to talk about that. But that's all about cost compression. If the contract ends in 2035, the bills are going to get more and more expensive because you can't amortize them over, spread those costs out longer. So that's the main benefit of doing the contract extension. It doesn't really preclude you or the district from deciding at some point we want to get rid of our state water. So that's sort of a separate decision.
Will it include studies of scenarios of sea level rise and climate change as of 2085?
The Delta Conveyance Project does. So that kind of.
So that will be part of the EIR on that thing?
Yeah. Defining the benefits of it and the impacts.
When the sea level gets to the intake of the Delta Tunnel and people are still paying for it, we probably won't be able to.
We can lower the ocean.
Yeah. We might as well.
So we'll just do the 2 first, and then we'll tackle the contract extension. So we're just going to keep monitoring the state activities and try to keep everyone informed, so we can be ready with the decision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah, great presentation. All right. So the other 2 items on the agenda are 3 items discussing the water agency updates. That we'll put off until next time. Future agenda items. I think it seems like we have kind of our plates full. Any other last comments? Public comments not on the agenda?
I just wanted to note that there's going to be a joint council meeting between Grover Beach, AG, and Pismo on March 3rd and Tuesday, 6th, to discuss Central Coast Blue.
Ooh.
So it's the first time all three agencies have been in the same room in 10 years, so I hear. So if anybody's interested in attending that, it's at the South County Regional Center in AG.
And it's like location, next steps, future, all of that.
Basically, yeah, to receive a presentation on the technical aspects, but also we recently had the memorandum of agreement come across us, and we all decided to
Get together.
yeah, it's a lot of money, so discussing all the aspects of it.
Good idea. I like that. All right. Any other? Yeah, Cynthia.
I'm a director on the Oceana Research District, but I do not speak in this capacity. And I just want to make it clear to everyone that I am no longer a member of the WRAC. I was last year, but even though I give that disclaimer every time before I give any public comments when I'm not speaking for the board, which is most of the time, I was thrown off of all committee assignments for this calendar year because the board did not believe that I should speak on any matter publicly when I dissented from some decision that the board has made. In particular, Director Gibson said that advocating for the environment is incompatible with being a director on the Oceana CSD, and I disagree with that. I'm going to continue to speak up, but I just wanted to make it clear, if you see me here, that I'm not representing the Oceana CSD. And I also wanted to thank whoever recommended this book at the last meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm only about 2/3 of the way through. It's really long, but it's a fascinating look at the history of water in California. And I've really learned a lot and gained a good understanding of why water rights are so messed up now. It's called The Dreamt Land, and it's by Mark Arax.
Dreamt.
The Dreamt Land.
Like the one we dreamed about.
He's got 3 or 4 books that deal with the water in our state.
All right.
Just 1 second.
Yeah,
I want
Tim,
to say
you're
thanks
good.
to Courtney for an awesome update on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Just-
Yeah, that was really good. Yeah. All right, and with that meeting adjourned until our next time, April 1st, 1:30, we'll be back in the council chambers again. Yeah. You better come anyway. All right, meeting adjourned.